Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining the session. It's a little bit weird for me to stand here because the sound is so funny. There's a little delay, so it sounds like a little bit for me like I hear myself a little bit later again. It's a little bit weird. Anyway, my name is Martin. I work for VMware. I'm part of the Spring engineering team. And my sub-team, my goal is to work on the Spring tools. So all the tooling extensions for your IDEs and for the stuff that you like. So the reason I go to work every morning is to make basically you more productive. Right? That's my goal. You more productive while hacking and working on Spring Boot applications. That's my goal. And that's why I'm here, to tell you a little bit more about, let's say, the latest and greatest that we did, and the latest and greatest that we think will help you to be more productive in the future. So the specific topic for my talk today, for the session, is really about the Spring Boot releases. Who uses Spring Boot? Okay, right session. Which version of Spring? So, who uses Spring Boot 3.1 in production? 3.1. Okay, 3.0. Okay, who is on 2.7 something? Okay, good. Who is on 2.6 something? Still? Okay. 2.5, 4, 3, 2. Who is on Spring Boot 1 point something? Don't be afraid. It's okay. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Who is on the latest patch version in production? Who is not on, probably not on the latest patch version? Everyone else, right? Roundabout? Okay. So there is a challenge, right? And the challenge is the Spring Boot team is so awesome at fixing CVEs, pushing out new releases, bringing new features to the community, and making you more effective and more productive using Spring Boot, that is actually already quite hard to keep up with that speed to be on the latest version all the time, right? Because there are new versions coming out quite frequently. So it's really hard to keep up to date. But if you want to keep up to date, if you want to stay on the latest version all the time, or if you want to jump from, let's say, 2.6 to 2.7, or what I think what's coming up for many of you now is jumping from 2.7 to 3.0, and what do? Right? So you go to the wiki or to the website or to the Spring Boot documentation, to the release docs, and you, I hope, carefully read through all this documentation about how to jump from one version to the other. So you really walk through that, right? You take the guidance of the Spring Boot team into account and do all that. Maybe step by step, maybe trial and error, whatever strategy you prefer, but you basically walk through all the documentation and you apply those changes yourself. You think about how to apply them to your source code, and then you walk through all that, which is great. So it's an awesome documentation, but it also takes some time. And it can be quite cumbersome to actually do that, especially if you're working in a company that has maybe not just one Spring Boot app in production or one Spring Boot app that you work on. Maybe you have a lot of microservices. You have tens or hundreds of projects that you really need to keep up to date all the time. So what are we trying to do to help you with that? We basically try to something like codify these migration instructions for you and automate them. So let the tools help you with this migration, and let the tools do probably maybe kind of the most tedious things for you. So that's the goal, right? The goal is not to promise that we will do everything for you. So there will be no single button where we say, yeah, upgrade to Spring Boot 3, and then it's all done, right? And you can be 100% sure, 100% safe, and we guarantee everything will just work, right? That will not be the case. But we try to automate as much as possible and give you as much of your time back as possible when upgrading to new Spring Boot versions. So, and this is just the start, right? So we just started with that. It's early days, but I think it's quite cool and quite nice to see what is already there, and to encourage you to try that, right? Probably quick advice in the beginning. So store all your source code in your version control, put a nice tag in there, and then try the tools to migrate so they can always roll back if something goes wrong. So that's kind of the disclaimer here, right? No guarantees involved since we are early days. But we wanted to give you this early, right? We want to let you experiment with that and give us feedback, because that's what we like, that's what we need. So if you have a project, you're using the tools to migrate, you stumble upon things, stuff that doesn't work, stuff that it's not yet working, stuff that is not yet included in the migration, in the automated one, and you have sample projects for that, give them to us, right? We are super happy to improve our tooling, improve these migration tooling to make it even better in the future, right? Okay, so I really love to work on tools, and I really don't like that much to show tools on slides. So that's why I switch over to some live demo. So I switch over to VS Code, and I have, of course, something that I already tried to go a second ago. So basically, what I have in my workspace is a relatively simple Spring pet clinic, the usual example, right? And since I work on the tools all the time, I don't have time to upgrade my Spring Boot pet clinic application all the time, so I'm still on 2.7.3. Right? 2.7.3, oh, that's quite outdated on multiple dimensions. And the first thing that we are trying in the tools to help you with the migration is actually to make you aware of new versions. So to tell you directly inside of the IDE, there is a new version. There is a new patch version, there is a new minor version, or there's a new major version. And give you that as kind of markers that you will see down below in the problems view. And make you aware of that. Right? In this case, it tells you there is a new patch version for 2.7, and there's a new major version, in this case 3.1.0. Right? This can be quite helpful for you. It can also be quite annoying for you, right? Because, yeah, of course, I know, I read the news, there is Spring Boot 3.1 out there, but I will not take care of that for the next few weeks, so don't show me this annoying information message all the time. So what you can, of course, do, let me try to search it in the preferences. You can always go to the preferences and tell the tools what severity each version upgrade should be shown up as, right? So, do you want to see all the patch updates? Do you want to see all the minor and major versions out there compared to the stuff that you have in your project all the time? Or as an error, as a warning, ignore that, whatever, right? So you can customize that to your needs, which I think is very important. And as an additional nice on top is that you can also get information about the support ranges. So as we all know, the Spring Boot team has a specific strategy for how long there are updates being provided for specific versions in the open source. And if you're on a commercial plan, you get a little bit more time. And we are able to tell you this in the tooling as well. So you can customize that. You can tell the tooling, say, okay, please tell me if I'm running out of open source support for this version of Spring Boot that I'm using in my project. Or I'm running out of commercial support. Depends on what you have. And since not everybody's on the commercial plan, you can just ignore that, right? So don't tell me about the commercial support ranges, only tell me about the open source support ranges, or vice versa, right? So I'm on the commercial plan, so I don't care so much about the open source ranges. I care more about the support plan for the commercial one. So only show me those errors and warnings when I'm running out of commercial support for the Spring Boot version that I'm using in my project. So this is, you can customize that, and this is making you aware of all that, right? So kind of switch the lights on. Hey, new patch version, new major version, whatever is out there. And you will see them in the problems view showing up here, in this case in the POM file, if you're using Gradle on the build Gradle file, of course. And of course, now you see this, oh, there's Spring Boot 3.1 available. Oh, that's great, thanks for telling me that. But what's the logical next step? The logical next step is you want to upgrade to that version. You want to switch to that, right? And that is why we give you quick fixes for that. So if you click on those problems, you will see, for example, for Spring Boot 2.7.12, should I do the change for you? Should I upgrade your POM file for you? Yeah, just do it for me. It's a patch upgrade. We will just switch the version of the parent POM, that's it. So you can just execute that quick fix. It will do that for you. Done. The assumption in mind that patch upgrades will only really require these changing the parent POM. It will not require deep code changes, will not require configuration changes. There is no deprecation going away or something like that. It's just a very simple change, right? That's one assumption that's making, just to make it easy, right? We already learned that it's not always the case, so we try to take care of that. There was kind of a MySQL connector that changed the artifact ID and stuff like that, but we will not dive into those details. The next quick fix here is probably more interesting, because that is giving you the option to say, yeah, of course I want to upgrade to Spring Boot 3.1. So let me just do that. Help me upgrade my project to Spring Boot 3.1. And I'm seeing below that there is progress going on. So it is computing changes. It takes a little while. But don't be nervous about that. We are working on that, of course. That's kind of part of the, oh yeah, that's early days. And it has probably the assumption in mind that you will not kind of execute that action all the time, 20 times a day when you work on your source code. So what does it do behind the scenes? It's executing our codified version of these migration steps. So it will look at your whole project, and it will not just try to change the parent POM version. That will be easy, right? And that will probably not take several seconds or whatever. It will not just do that. It would really look at your whole project. We'll look at your property files, or we'll look at your Java source code, we'll look at whatever, right? We really look at all the stuff, analyze all the stuff, and then apply all those changes for you. And if I take a look here, for example, what changes happened? So it upgraded my POM file to the new parent version, of course. It changed the Java version to 17. It upgraded the Jacoco version, the dependency, inserted the new Jakarta packages, switched over the MySQL connector to the new artifact IDs, and so on. So it's really relatively smart about what needs to be done compared to what I have to where I would like to go. So it does all those changes for you in the POM file. But that's not everything, right? So if I take a further look, of course you need to switch over, for example, imports to Jakarta packages, because in Spring Boot 3 we have the switch from the JavaX to the Jakarta packages, so you need to update all your imports. Maybe not all of them, some of them stay at JavaX, but we know which. So the tool automates all that for you. It does not just add the dependency to the POM file, it also upgrades your source code to import the new packages for you. And we can take a look. This basically happens everywhere. In addition to that, to the pure migration, it also applies certain, let's say, best practices for you. Something that we think you should do when you upgrade to the new Spring Boot version. For example, here's a path variable with a name, but that's really the same as the name of the parameter already, so you don't really need that. Let's get rid of that. That's not needed anymore. Or if you, for example, let me take a look at this one here. Okay, Java 17 supports text blocks, so you should really adopt this best practice of using text blocks instead of long string concatenations. Let me do that for you, right? I apply that change to my source code. Okay. There are also maybe some other little things like, oh, here's another assertion being applied and so on. But in the end, it really did all those changes for me. In this case, of course, for my demo, all the changes that I need, because, of course, we try out pet cleaning, so that's an easy thing for us to really automate down to the end. But that's what you get, right? So this is awesome. But sometimes you maybe don't really exactly know which parts does the tooling take a look at and which maybe not. Or, oh, these best practices are great, I really love text blocks, but please do not apply that change to my source code. I really hate that. I really hate text blocks for whatever reason, right? So what can you do? Let me roll back those changes. So let me get back to this, and ignore those problems. It is one of those open issues that we need to figure out to see how can we tell VS Code to actually update those things. Oh no, it's updated. That's good. So instead of executing this quick fix, or going to the POM file, and you see the quick fix directly here to upgrade that, or to open the release notes. You can also invoke the command for that and see, please upgrade Spring Boot versions. And you see which migration guides we already automated, or that are automated, that are included in here. So it's basically automate older Spring Boot stuff to Spring Boot 2.7, or automate older stuff to 3.1. And if you select something like this, it would basically do exactly the same. But you can take a look inside. So you can dive one level deeper and see what are all the steps that are applied. In this case, you see, oh, it's kind of the general migration to Spring Boot 3, upgrade the POM file for 3.0 to 3.1. So it's basically the upgrade to Spring Boot 3.1 is really upgrading your source code to 3.0, and then from 3.0 to 3.1. And it also tells you, oh, please migrate the JavaX binding things. and so on. So I can even dive deeper. Let's see what's going on when I upgrade it to 7 boot application to 3.0. What are all the, what's all the things that are included? So enable Spring Batch things, migrate to Java 17, for example. That's the change of the POM file, for example, and all those other things, right? Here's, for example, remove unnecessary constructor binding annotation, so I don't need that anymore. Please remove that for me automatically, and so on. Migrate to Java 17. Let me take a look. What belongs to migrate to Java 17? Oh, it's kind of switch over to Java 11 and then switch over to Java 17, change the version of the POM file, and use text blocks. Okay, I hate text blocks, so let me get rid of that. Don't execute this step in my migration, and then I could go back and say, yeah, execute everything else except from this step, because that's probably something that you don't like. Right? So you can customize that a little bit. It's not just the black box where you say, yeah, press a button, we do all the stuff, and then it's done. It is actually giving you the choice, say, okay, execute everything, or no, don't execute everything for me, do only these specific steps, or exclude certain steps in this migration because I don't like them, I would like to take a look at them manually later on. Things like that, right? Cool. Okay, so this is kind of give you a glimpse at what do we do in the tooling to help you with these migrations, and we will work on those things and continue to work on them, and we don't do that alone. And that's why I would like to show you and talk to you a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. So how do we do all this? What is done? And we don't start it from scratch with all this, right? So what we are doing is we are basically using an open source project called Open Rewrite. And the purpose of Open Rewrite is exactly things like this. Automate code changes, for example, to adopt a new version of a framework, adopt a new version of a library, adopt a new version of the language, change the source code to call something, get rid of deprecated warnings, whatever. Things like that. Automate those changes for projects. So you can, as I said, kind of patch CVEs. For example, oh, I know that to patch a certain CVE, I am not allowed to call this method or this constructor. I need to call a different constructor in my source code and pass a second parameter to disable a certain piece of functionality that is dangerous. Right? You can do that, right? You can have this in Open Rewrite defined to switch over calls to this constructor to another constructor, and it will adopt those changes and change your source code to the new constructor in this case. Internally, this open source project, Open Rewrite, there are several other sessions, by the way, at the conference that will also talk about Open Rewrite or has Open Rewrite included somewhere. So how Open Rewrite is working under the hood, it really parses your project, right? Resolves dependencies, creates ASTs, so runs kind of the first part of the compiler basically, creates ASTs in an abstract representation, and then runs transformations on these ASTs and dump the result back into the code. And it's smart enough to not just kind of blindly dump everything and ignore your formatting settings or whatever. It really is smart to just change the bits and pieces that it actually changed in the AST in the output file. So that's awesome. And it's not limited to Java source code. That's what we have seen. We saw changes to the POM XML file. If I would have, for example, a non-existing property in my application.properties file, in Spring Pet Cleaning, it would have changed that as well. So it can parse and create this abstract representation of different kinds of files. Java files, property files, YAML files, Gradle build files, Kotlin files, Python, whatever, right? So this is kind of a really living thing. new languages, new basic stuff is being introduced to that all the time. So really awesome. And these changes that you can apply, and this is kind of the little power behind the scenes, you can implement those basic changes, like change a package import or change a little piece of code, and then you can aggregate that. And that's what you've seen in the menu that I showed you about how this is all organized and where you can pick and choose which changes to apply. It really, you can combine all this in a huge hierarchy about, okay, combine these 3 changes into a bigger change. And use this bigger change in even a bigger recipe. What's that's called? These recipes. Those recipes, and this is a nice part of Open Rewrite. Those recipes where you define how to change these abstract syntax trees, elements, how to change source code, whatever. You can implement them in 2 different ways. You can either really go deep and implement them in Java, so you can really write Java code to modify these ASTs. There's an API for that. Or you can generate code snippets, change deep code structures, whatever. Or you can define them in YAML. So in YAML, you can do things like, oh, there's an abstract thing for kind of, for example, change the name of a method. And then you can write a YAML recipe saying, kind of parameterize that and say, okay, this is my change method, it's of type change method name, and then please change the method of this type, of this name, to this new name. We will see that in action in a second. Right? So this is really, it makes it easy to kind of create concrete recipes for your project or for us, for the Spring Boot 3 migration, based on some basic fundamental building blocks. And you can see all this in the docs. So to give you an idea about that, let me switch over to this and say Open Rewrite Docs. Let's see. And there's a big catalog of recipes that already exist. For example, all the types of files, all the types of stuff that you can work on that recipes exist for. Let me dive into the Java 1 recipes for doing stuff on Java. Remove a static import, remove unused imports, remove an annotation, order the imports, delete a method argument, change the method name, all these little building blocks. And the same sort of building blocks exist for all these other file types that you have seen. So you can use all that. This is quite a rich experience already to really work with those things. For example, for property files, you have your own property files, you want to automate that. You can define recipes, say, okay, add a new property to the property files based on whatever, right? Or change the property value, change the property key, you rename the property key from one name to the other, add a recipe, say, okay, old name is this, new name is that, run the recipe, it does all the changes to your property files. Really, really nice. Okay, so the cool thing about those recipes is that they're all open source, right? And that the community can contribute. You can basically contribute your own recipes to that, and that's what people do. And that's where most of the Spring Boot migration recipes, where all this is kind of basically coded and written, it's also available in these open source, Open Rewrite repositories, right? So there's a big repository called Rewrite Spring, and there you can find all the implementations and all the recipes that are specific to Spring. Same for other frameworks, same for Java languages, and things like that. You can also run those recipes yourself if you want to, right? So there's no need to use our little fancy IDE integration. You can also go ahead and say, yeah, I run those recipes myself on the project, either by including stuff in your project, either by totally run that from the command line using Maven, for example, yourself or Gradle. And what we did is we basically added a UI surface to that into the Spring tools. So what you've seen when I demoed that in the beginning is really invoking the open rewrite recipes and running those recipes and applying those recipes using open rewrite to the source code of your project. Or with command line, you can see, okay, what's the structure of my recipes? How are they being constructed? What do they really do? And then pick and choose. So there's not, we invested a lot of time into that, but we also benefit a lot from work from others, from the Open Rewrite project specifically, from other teams, and so on. And the cool thing is, you can do that yourself as well if you want to. So if you have your own project, and you think, oh, I'm migrating, I change a method name, maybe another team uses that library that I provide, it uses those method names, but I would like to help them to adopt a new version of my library, you can write the recipes yourself and provide them with you. So let me give you an idea about that. I have a little movie rentals application. And this movie rentals application, that's my little controller. It uses a movie service. And the movie service is from those other guys over there, right? They implement this movie service. And they have a new version of movie services. So they don't use, they have a second snapshot. Let me switch over. Oh, holy moly, the get movies method is not around anymore, right? They changed it. Bad guys. They changed the API. But maybe for a good reason, right? Maybe there was a good reason to change that. So, but the cool thing is, they also implemented a little recipe for me, and they gave it to me. And this little recipe is one of those YAML things, right? They call it, yeah, adopt to a new version of my little library, and change method name. That's kind of the recipe that they use, and that they parameterize, saying, yeah, movie service get movies should now be called get all movies. So that's what I should use instead. And of course, I could go back to my rental controller, and now I walk through, of course, millions of lines of code to adapt to this. But I could also kind of run the recipe. There's one, so let me kind of switch back to that version. And what we did in the tools to also surface those manually written recipes. So you can go to the preferences. Let's see if I can find that. In the Spring tools for Open Rewrite, the stuff that's under the hood, and you can add your own recipes to the tooling. So the tooling is aware of those recipes. Like we can tell the tools here, you can find additional recipes over here. And if you do that, you can execute individual recipes. In this case, my special one shows up here. Adapt to changed movie service. I can do that. Execute that, and it changes all the stuff. So I switch back to this other version. Done. So that way, you can author your own recipes to help your clients to adopt new versions of your project yourself in your company. Maybe quite handy way to do things like that. And this is just the surface, right? So changing a method name, yeah, that looks easy. But you can do more sophisticated stuff with that. Right? You could even say, okay, instead of, you can change source code. Right? You can put kind of a whole new block of source code and insert that instead of something else if you want to. Since you can implement those recipes in Java and walk through the AST, you can more or less do everything. Of course, you should be careful to not destroy the code, really, that you modify. It could be a bit dangerous. But if you are careful implementing those recipes, you can actually do things like that. And you can do quite advanced stuff with that. So really, really cool, really interesting, I think. Just the surface of that. And in the tools, so we did that, right? So we added this UI surface for executing those recipes for helping you migrate Spring Boot applications from one version to the other. Then we added the option to let you execute your own recipes in the tools. It's kind of a nice way. And then we thought about, some of those recipes, we really like them, and they have this kind of best practice style, like, oh, the auto-wired constructor is no longer necessary. The auto-wired annotation is not necessary anymore on a constructor, right? You don't need that anymore, right? You should remove that, really. You should walk through your code and remove that. And we can put that in these migrate from one version to the other, and then it would remove all the auto-wired annotations from those constructors where it's not needed anymore, so that's great. But we also would like to go one step further and give you this information about what we think is a good practice right away when you write source code, right? Not only when you execute the migration and then some stuff happens in the background, but give you this information right away while you're typing. Oh, 1 second. And this is why we use Open Rewrite and go one step further to show you these stuff individually at files and tell you about that. So we added validations and allow you to apply those code changes just for this little snippet of code, just for this annotation, just for this file, or just for my whole project. So it goes a little bit beyond what Open Rewrite does out of the box, because Open Rewrite is really about looking at the whole project, changing everything, and done. It's really more about while you're typing, while you hack on Spring Code, when you open your source code, it tells you, hey, this auto-wired annotation, it's not necessary anymore. You can change that. You should maybe change that. Up to you. Right? And then there's a quick fix. There's kind of always this combination about the validation and the quick fix. The quick fix is really executing a recipe that says, okay, what's the solution to this validation that we highlight? In this case, easy, remove the annotation. And this combination, and you will find this combination in various places. And of course, you can customize that as well. So if you are annoyed by that, having all these warnings in your source code because you love the auto-wired annotation, for example, you can really take a look at that and see, please change the severity of all those validations that we do for Spring 2x specific things, Spring 3x specific things. We even have some AOT optimizations built in. So for example, there's a validation that says, okay, if you use a certain Spring in a certain way, it will cause the AOT engine to produce less optimal code. If you want to adopt Spring Boot 3, if you want to use AOT, if you want to produce native images, whatever, and you really would like to produce the most optimal native image down the road, we try to help you with that a little bit ahead of time in your source code, telling you, hey, if you use Spring in this way, it will not produce the most optimal one. It might be a little better if you do it the other way around, right? For example, you have an add bean annotated method, and the return type is some abstract interface, right? AOT engine will probably not be able to figure out the exact type of that, so it might be slightly less optimized code. So it might be better to return the exact type of the object that you create, the exact type of the bean. So the tooling will flag you that, say, hey, it's not returning the exact type of the bean here on this method. Should I change that for you? And you can change that, and it will change the return type to the exact type of the bean of the object that you create, that you return. As long as the tooling can figure that out, right? If you create your beans in a very, very, very complicated way, and the tooling might probably screw up because source code analysis it cannot cover that, cannot find that out. But that's probably just a rare case. Things like that. Right? More and more things that we do for those validations, and that we do for those changes to apply those quick fixes. And again, if you like them or if you don't like them, it's really up to you, right? You can change the severity. So customize that to things that you think make sense for you, which I think is very important because, of course, with all of those validations, and that's a reason why we stayed away from those validations for a very, very long time implementing Spring tools, is sometimes it's really hard to really figure out, is this really wrong? Or could that be a problem? Or maybe not? And then you reflect that as a warning and you get annoyed, right? You're annoyed because, oh my God, yeah, shut up. I'm doing the right thing. I know that. It's correct. Don't tell me it's wrong. I know that better. My code is correct. And you're right. And there are two options for you. And you should actually do both in those cases. The first is change the severity so that you're not annoyed anymore. And the second is tell us about that. So please, 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 if a validation goes wrong, if it does the wrong thing, if it is missing anything, if there's something you would really like to see as a validation, something that you're missing, something you always fall into, some problem you would love to see validation, please tell us. File kind of an issue at the GitHub repository for the tools and tell us about that, because then we can improve that and you will be less annoyed next time. And you can maybe enable that again and help many, many others using Spring Boot to actually do that. And with that, I of course have a few resources. So if you're more interested in open rewrite stuff, more stuff about the open rewrite, if you would like to take a look at the Spring tools, you probably know where to find them. The stuff that I showed you, I used VS Code because that's kind of one of the IDEs that people like and people use and where we built the Spring tools for. We also built the Spring tools that we do for Eclipse. So if you are on Eclipse, you will basically get all the stuff that you have seen here as well, right? If you're on IntelliJ, we don't build our Spring tools for the IntelliJ environment because the IntelliJ people do their own tools for Spring, and they do an awesome job with that, so no need for us. So you will most likely see things that look like this as well in there, but maybe built on a different base or slightly different. But the story is basically all the same. And I think there's even a session at the conference later today, maybe? I don't exactly remember. Probably later today from some. You're the one doing the session from JetBrains? Okay. Yeah. Oh, perfect. So few other sessions. So please, if you are using IntelliJ, for example, interested in those things, go to the session from JetBrains from Marit, and maybe some other sessions around Open Rewrite. Some of you, right? Some others, and take a look at those things as well. So I think it's we have quite good coverage of all the things. And even if your development environment is not already supporting that with surfacing that at the UI level, you can still use those codified migrations using Open Rewrite from the command line, using Maven or Gradle and things like that. So you can still benefit from all those things that are already automated, which I think is awesome. And of course, I should have mentioned in the beginning that I would be super happy to answer questions in between. which is always awesome to tell the audience in the end. Sorry for that. Forgot about that. But if you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, maybe if there's still a little bit of time now. Otherwise, I will be in front of this cinema after the session, of course. And I will be here throughout the conference until, I think, tomorrow afternoon. So happy to answer questions. There are a few sessions on Abonniere. There's also a session on a project called Spring Boot Migrator, which I also would like to highly recommend. So that is on Thursday, I think. Thursday? Yeah, on Thursday. So make sure to join that session as well from Fabian. And with that, there are no more questions. Otherwise, again, in the front of the cinema afterwards. And thanks for joining, and I hope you like the session. Hope you find it useful, and happy Spring Boot coding. Thank you.